Well, she made her pick. It's Tim Walz. Who is this guy? Well, we're going to tell you everything you need to know about him, mostly from his own mouth. And, well, spoiler alert, he's a disaster for America. We got to stop this. We got to stop it now. Also, Jamie Raskin plotting a coup for January 6th next year. We'll show you exactly what he had to say. Oh, Trump's ads are already out against Tim Walz, by the way. Wait till you see those. I forgot to mention it. And more news about the Secret Service, the failures of the Secret Service on the day of that assassination attempt against Donald Trump. We're on that story, and we're going to give you the latest coming up right now. I'm Larry O'Connor. You can call me Larry. We're streaming live across all of Town Hall Media's social media platforms that accommodate live streaming video. I'm talking about Rumble, where we got a very active chat going right now, plus YouTube, plus X, plus Facebook. And if you're watching us after the fact across all the Town Hall Media websites, we really appreciate that too. Town Hall Media is our home. They're the mothership from townhall.com to hotair.com to twitchy.com to PJ Media to Red State to Bearing Arms. It's a whole family of sites dedicated to you for your content that you want most. And if you want the full experience of Town Hall, what you want is to be a VIP member. That gives you an ad-free experience on the sites, and it also gives you access to exclusive content just for VIP members and the ability to interact and comment with every article, every video, every podcast, and every article. Did I already say articles? So join the VIP membership of Town Hall right now. You get 50% off if you use my name, Larry, Larry. That's the Town Hall VIP membership, 50% off. Thank you for that. Keep our journalism going here. If big tech decides to crack down and demonetize and deplatform, we'll always be able to deliver all of this great content to you if you're a member of VIP. So Kamala Harris made her decision. She went with Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota. I've got lots to say about that choice and what it tells you about the Kamala Harris campaign, and I'll share that in a minute. But let's go straight to the Trump campaign because they had an ad all ready to go. Take a look at it.
What could be weirder than signing a bill into law that requires schools to stock tampons in boys' bathrooms? Or weirder than signing legislation allowing minors to receive sex change operations? Try electing the man who signed those bills, Vice President of the United States. Enter Chief Weirdo Tim Walz. As governor of Minnesota, Walz supported legislation that endangers minors, hurts women, and puts radical ideology ahead of common sense. Now Kamala wants Walz to enforce those laws on a national scale. Tim Walz, too weird, too radical.
All right. So that's actually from the Super PAC, Make America Great Super PAC. It's a great ad. And I've got a lot to say about it. First of all, you might be looking at this saying, wait a second, how is that possible? The governor of Minnesota did all those things. Minnesota is a Midwestern state, northern state, an agricultural state, a blue-collar state. Why would the people of Minnesota elect somebody who's that radical and that left-wing? Well, first of all, learn this, memorize it, repeat it whenever you can. Tim Walz is Gavin Newsom with a Minnesota accent. Tim Walz is Gavin Newsom with a Midwest haircut. Tim Walz has done for Minnesota what Gavin Newsom did to California. He might as well be a California Democrat. All right. This whole folksy plaid shirt Minnesota thing that Kamala Harris thinks she's going to pull over your eyes. Because remember, they just sell products to you, not ideas or policies. It's all a fraud. He is as destructive, as liberal, and as radical as Gavin Newsom. Every one of those policies you just saw, carbon copy, Xerox, duplicate of California.
Larry.
Yeah.
You know you're wearing a plaid shirt, right?
It's not flannel, though. This is different. And by the way, I'm from Michigan, a real heartland kind of state, so I can do that, and I keep it real, okay? But I also live in California. You know what? Speak when spoken to, Kevin. How dare you, sir? This isn't plaid. This is checked. There's a difference. Back to Tim Walz. The man is a radical. Why would she do this? Why would you do this in a state, by the way? For those of you who are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Minnesota, it's Midwest. Yeah, okay. Just so you know, as someone from the Midwest, Minnesota is the crazy left-wing cousin, all right, that you sort of see every holiday, but they're not really one of you. Okay, no offense to those of you in Minnesota, but let's face it, get your act together. Minnesota has not voted for a Republican president since 1972, Richard Nixon. All right. They are the only state in 1984 that didn't vote for Ronald Reagan. Let me spell it out for you a little bit plainer. There is no state in America that has gone as long as Minnesota has gone without voting for a Republican for president. That includes California, that includes New York, that includes Illinois, that includes Massachusetts, that includes the most liberal blue state you can think of. That's how blue Minnesota is. So why in God's name would Kamala Harris pick Tim Walz? It's not like she needs to land Minnesota, although maybe she's nervous. Based on some of the polling right before Kamala Harris became the nominee, and by became, I mean was selected and placed as the nominee by very powerful rich people, Minnesota was actually looking very close. And don't get me wrong, Minnesota has outlier moments. Sometimes they elect a Republican governor. They elected Jesse Ventura, so they have an independent streak. But when it comes to presidential politics, you have to go all the way back to 1970. You have to go back 52 years since they have gone for a Republican in the Electoral College. That's how blue Minnesota is. And Kamala Harris made the choice to get this guy as her running mate. Well, one of the reasons is because of that ad right there. Did you see how they kept saying he's weird? Weird's the word they've been using about J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. Well, Tim Walz is the guy who came up with it. He started calling J.D. Vance weird, and it stuck. And this is the meme candidacy, isn't it? So they decided to reward him for creating that meme. But the ad is 100% accurate. He's not just a weird guy. He's got a lot of weird ideas. For instance, this was Tim Walz celebrating the fact that he, after everything that we've learned and everything we've known with the border and with crime and illegal immigration and the infiltration under the Biden administration, he decided it was a good idea to make sure that every illegal immigrant in Minnesota had a driver's license. This isn't some idea that comes 15 years ago when people thought that illegal immigration wasn't nearly as bad as it is right now. This is knowing what Biden and Kamala did at the border.
It's done.
A packed room at the St. Paul Armory erupted after the governor's signature made driver's license for all the law of the land.
Yeah, and then they started chanting in Spanish. Si se puede. They started chanting in Spanish with their fists in the air, si se puede, after he signed it into law that if you have if you're in the country illegally, you can still get a driver's license. But it doesn't end there. We're about to show you his position on the border and illegal immigration that goes well beyond just signing into law the driver's license thing. Let me cut to the chase, though. The way this guy is, he could easily transition to be Kamala Harris's border czar and pick up exactly where she's left off. Look at this.
And I think seeing a plan that's out there, talking about it with folks, knowing that he's not going to do anything. He talks about this wall. I always say, let me know how high it is. If it's 25 feet, then I'll invest in the 30-foot ladder factory. That's not how you stop this.
Yeah. If you build a wall, I'll be sure to invest in a factory that builds ladders to help people get over. And of course, that stupid lie we've already seen play out in real terms. Where there is a wall, the illegal crossings have been reduced exponentially. And shockingly, where there's no wall, people are walking across the border. But he didn't end there.
Should Minnesota be a sanctuary state?
If the definition of that is that the federal government enforces immigration law and local law enforcement enforces local law, then yes.
Should cities be allowed to be sanctuary cities?
Yes, local control.
Okay, but see, that's not what a definition of a sanctuary city or state is. The actual definition is that local law enforcement does not cooperate with ICE. So he's not just a radical, he's a lying radical. Everybody knows what sanctuary laws mean and how they end up being applied. If you arrest an illegal immigrant on a crime, you should hand them over to a federal authority through ICE and have them go through the deportation process because, well, they're criminals and they shouldn't be here in the first place. By the way, that's the law if you're a green card holder. If you've actually entered our country legally and you're not yet a citizen and you break the law, you have forfeited your right to be here. You can be deported. And yet illegal immigrants, for some reason, are treated differently. But according to Tim Walz, your governor, the man who now wants to be a heartbeat away from the presidency, he thinks everybody should be a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state. And that's how he's governed. Seems pretty radical, doesn't he? You might also say, based on his economic policies, that he's a bit of a Marxist, even a socialist. You could call him that, but he'll just push back gently on that notion.
But we can get out there, reach out, make the case. And for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
Well, I'll give him credit for being honest, at least, because he has admitted in that clip that their progressive values is, in fact, socialism, or rightly labeled as socialism. He just wants to nuance that and say, oh, sure, you call it socialism. And I guess technically by the book, it is socialism. But up here in Minnesota, we just call it neighborliness. One man socialism. Again, it's funny, though, because socialism is always enacted at the barrel of a gun. Yeah, you try to push back against their neighborliness when they institute it as the law of the land. And if you choose not to participate in that neighborliness and say, I'm not really feeling quite as neighborly as Kamala Harris and Tim Walz wants to make me be neighborly. In fact, I've got a bit of an independent streak. I'd rather live out here all by myself, do my own thing, and not participate in your mandated, forced neighborliness. See how that works out for you. It'll work out the same way socialism and Marxism works out every time it's tried. By the barrel of a gun.
But we can get out there, reach out, make the case. And for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
Oh, that's just absolutely beautiful.
Hey,
also, yeah.
Did you notice what live stream he said that on?
Yeah, this is the White Dudes for Harris, isn't it?
That's right.
Oh, look at that. Well, you don't get much whiter than him. Although it does look like he's put a little blush on or something, or he was flushed. Maybe he was just so riled up that he's one of those guys where when he starts to get riled up, his face goes from pasty white to beet red. Those guys always freak me out. But yeah, that's the way. He's one of those white dudes for Harris. That's for sure. He was also recently on Meet the Press, and he was asked, this is before Joe Biden was forcibly removed against his will as the nominee for the Democrats. And he was asked about Joe Biden's mental acuity and his physical capabilities.
I spend a lot of time with the president, and he's great. We're talking, we're chatting, and all this. And I think, we all get a little older. That's what happens. But you also gain that insight. And I think when it comes to these issues, working across the aisle to get things done, you see the president just doing this with dignity, doing it with class, getting up every day, doing the work. So I think he's just doing what he does. And I think it's a kind of incumbent upon all of us. Look, my mom's 88, still living on the farm, drives herself. Folks are able to do this. So I think this little bit of ageism that goes to this, if it's not that, would be something else. They attack all of us on something. This is part of it.
Oh, wow. So it's ageism. If you're sitting there and you were watching Joe Biden just like everybody else, and you thought that he wasn't capable of being the nominee, let alone running the country, and you started to question whether Joe Biden should be the nominee, you're ageist, you hater, you bigot, you bully. Of course, sort of worked out that the vast majority of Democrats, including the leadership of his own party, thought the same thing. And now he benefits from it. Imagine how it all works out. If you want to get rid of Joe Biden, you're an ageist, you're a bigot, you're a hater, you're prejudiced. But now that we did get rid of him, through completely undemocratic and un-American methods. Well, now Tim Walz gets to ride in there and be the new running mate of Kamala Harris after being selected, hand selected. Not one vote cast for any of these people. Boy, it's good to be a Democrat, isn't it? So that's Tim Walz, the lunatic, pro-illegal immigration, enabling Marxist. But there's more to Tim Walz, because if you think of Minnesota over the last several years, you think of one thing. You think of George Floyd, and you think of the riots that started there, crippled the cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis. He was the governor during all of that. And that's where we get the latest Trump ad. This comes from the campaign itself, not the super PAC. Take a look at the powerful, fiery, but mostly peaceful message in this ad.
Harris sending this out on X. If you're able to chip in now to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground in Minnesota. Thanks to Harris's promotion, the group reportedly raised $35 million in just a few weeks.
Darnica Floyd, charged with second-degree murder for stabbing a friend to death, and she got out of jail too. A twice-convicted rapist, currently charged with kidnapping and sexual assault, and he walks out too.
The Freedom Fund raked in donations when it was promoted by many, including now Vice President Kamala Harris.
Sean Michael Tillman shot and killed a passenger on a train platform after reportedly being released from jail 3 weeks prior. All thanks to the Minnesota Freedom Fund.
Donovan Boone was charged with breaking into the home of an ex-girlfriend and choking her. Freedom Fund bailed him out for $3,000 cash, and he hasn't shown up for court since.
I often don't even look at a charge specifics when I bail someone out.
The Hennepin County attorney called out the Minnesota Freedom Fund for bailing Mosley out of jail twice previously, even though he was arrested for having a gun in the courthouse.
The Minnesota Freedom Fund, which pays cash bail for low-income criminals, paid Tims's entire $10,000 bail in cash.
11 days later, police found a man bleeding from the head and ears in this alley. Police were able to arrest Tims in connection to this violent assault.
Howard was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The Minnesota Freedom Fund acknowledged supporting Howard's bail.
That's a powerful ad, and it's about Kamala Harris's participation and encouragement in raising money for that Minnesota Freedom Fund. But what you need to understand is that entire climate was created, fostered, promoted, supported, and lionized by the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz. Tim Walz was the man who led the anti-police movement in light of the George Floyd murder. Take a look.
And I will not patronize you as a white man without living those lived experiences of how very difficult that is. But I'm asking you to help us. Help us use humane way to get the streets to a place where we can restore the justice so that those that are expressing rage and anger and demanding justice are heard.
Yeah, he let it burn. He took a knee to the mob. He took a knee to the rioters. He took a knee to the arsonists and the looters. And he wanted you to think that he was just a sympathetic white man who was just trying to bring peace. But his rhetoric and his language and his actions and his inactions contributed to the violent anarchy.
And I refuse to have it take away the attention of the stain that we need to be working on is what happened with those fundamental institutional racism that allows a man to be held down in broad daylight. And thank God a young person had a camera to video it, because there's not a person here or listening today that wonders how many times that camera's not there. These are tough questions. These are things that have been brewing in this country for 400 years.
Yeah, mostly created by and led by Democrats, his party that he chose to be in. Understand something here as he stands there, the whitest of all possible white men, lecturing you about the fundamental systemic racism in law enforcement in the state of Minnesota. He is, in fact, the acting governor of Minnesota. What the hell did he do to create and foster this systemic racism in the police force in Minneapolis, if that's really what he believes? What the hell did he do, and why is he responsible for the creation of the systemic racism in the judicial system in the state of Minnesota? It took George Floyd being killed and the riots to get this guy to actually say or do something about it. It's amazing how these whitest of all white men run for office, get power, and then when something happens, like the George Floyd death, they're the first one saying, yeah, this state is racist. Dude, you're the governor of that state. You should resign if that's the case. But no, they never give up power, do they? They never give up power and say, I'll give it to this black man. He should do that. It's systemic racism, and it takes me, the white hero, to fix it. Because they don't care about black people, and they don't care about racism. They care about power. That's all they ever care about. And for those of you who are saying, oh, wait, I heard the media tell me about those demonstrations and protests, those actions to bring about change, those demonstrations to draw attention to systemic racism in Minnesota. And those weren't riots, Larry. There was no looting. There was no violence. There was no arson. They were fiery, but mostly peaceful, right? Let's take a moment to remember exactly the aftermath of the Minnesota riots under the guidance of, and frankly, under the permission of Governor Tim Walz. This is what Minnesota looked like, thanks to Governor Tim Walz. This was on his watch. He did nothing to stop this. I mean, you saw, I just showed you what he did. He stood at a podium, took a knee to the mob, and said, that's right, we're all racist. Now, please, please, you're just distracting from everyone who wants to be heard. No, they weren't distracting. This is what they wanted people to hear. They wanted you to feel threatened. They wanted you to know that they would burn your city too. This riot, this arson, this looting, this violence, it served a purpose. This is what everyone on Black Lives Matter wanted you to hear. That's why corporations started paying Black Lives Matter off. That's why the money kept flowing into Black Lives Matter. Don't burn our business too. Don't burn our city too. That's Tim Walz's Minnesota. That's exactly who he is. Oh, and after the fact, after the governor surveyed all of that damage, all of that property loss, all of that violence, all of that arson, all of those private businesses and homes that were destroyed by the angry mob, what did he have to say? He took to the cameras, stood behind a podium with the state flag of Minnesota behind him, and he rationalized and justified all of it.
A society that does not put equity and inclusion at the center of it is certainly going to eventually come to the places where we're at. This is a moment of inflection. It's a moment of real change. It's a moment that those folks who are out there demanding this are not going to take a commission or a report. They're going to want fundamental change. And that is what I think that's one of the exciting things in the midst of all this. You can feel a sense of optimism coming back.
Yeah. By the way, check on the crime stats in Minnesota since he reimagined law enforcement and encouraged the local city councils and county supervisors to defund the police and, send social workers out there instead of the cops at a violent situation. Go ahead and check the crime stats in Minnesota and find out what's happened now that he has been so excited about the change that he was able to shepherd in. It's funny how that works. I'm the governor. We're going to let this burn so that I can now be the savior that comes in and brings all this change that people are demanding. And then, of course, the change makes people's lives that much more miserable. But this is Tim Walz. This is his political philosophy. He is a radical left-wing socialist. And if that wasn't enough, if you think radical, woke, left-wing socialist policies, you can't help but think about transgender activism and how it plays out right now in state after state after state led by Democrats. And Tim Walz is no different. In fact, he's one of the worst of them all. He joined Gavin Newsom in making his state a sanctuary for children. Children to undergo transgender, gender affirming care, which includes chemical sterilization and physical mutilation. And he's proud of it.
Well, today, Governor Tim Walz signed an executive order providing legal protection to those who come to Minnesota for gender-affirming health care. John Croman joins us now live from the Capitol with more about what prompted today's action. Hi, John.
Real fast, in case you missed it, this is the other part of the story, and you're going to watch the whole report out of Minnesota about this man and what he did. But did you catch it? This is an executive action. Just like authoritarian Kamala Harris, who loves the power that she wields whenever she's in an executive position, Tim Walz did not bother drafting legislation and proposing it in the House legislature or the state legislature or the state Senate. He did not bother to try to convince the hearts and minds of the people of Minnesota through their representatives to vote for this and pass it as a law that he would sign in. Nope. He acted single-mindedly, in an authoritarian way, with a grand stroke of his pen. This is now what Minnesota will do. This is now how Minnesota will behave on this most sensitive and controversial issue. He just said, screw you all. I'm in charge and you'll do what I say. And watch what that executive action actually does.
Hey, Rena, this comes at a time when a lot of other states are passing bills that would restrict gender affirming care or outlaw it for minors. And there's actually a bill here pending at the legislature here at the Capitol that would make Minnesota sort of a trans care refuge state. But the governor did not want to wait for that to get to his desk.
When our children tell us who they are, it is our job as grown-ups to listen and to believe them.
It was an event that had all the trappings of a bill signing ceremony. A huge crowd of lawmakers, advocates, and families, in this case, gathered in support of legal protections for people seeking gender-affirming care for themselves or their children. But the paper Governor Walz signed was an executive order. His action comes at a time when transgender persons across the nation feel under siege.
This is life-threatening.
The Iowa Senate passed a bill Tuesday.
Those in favor of the motion shall say aye.
Barring doctors from providing puberty blockers, hormone therapy, or gender-affirming surgery to anyone under 18. Mississippi passed a similar bill last week, barring gender-affirming care. In New Hampshire, there's a bill that would require schools to tell parents what their kid's gender is.
We'll make sure that Minnesota's place as a welcoming, loving, neighborly state where you are welcome and will be free of persecution or anything else that we're trying to see in some other states.
In committee hearings, GOP lawmakers have asserted children are too young to make decisions about gender.
These are damaging, lifelong procedures.
They've also brought up custody disputes.
If one parent brings a child here for gender affirming care and the other parent lives in Alaska, do you believe that that would be inconvenient for the parent that lives in Alaska?
Many states are asking their queer people to find two spaces that are comfortable, the closet or the coffin. And we are saying we are not going to accept that in Minnesota. In Minnesota, you can stay.
So I guess Kamala Harris just made the choice that much clearer this November, if it wasn't already. That's the running mate. That's the man who Kamala Harris now wants to be one heartbeat away from the presidency. He is a radical. He is a Marxist. He is a race baiter. And by the way, he's completely incompetent. As the governor of a state has one major responsibility, and that's the safety of the citizenry. And during the Black Lives Matter riots of 2020, he gladly let his state burn so that he could retain power and be the great white savior to bring about hope and change. One other observation, though, that I think is worth noting. See, either way, Kamala Harris was going to make a DEI hire here. And Tim Walz, make no mistake, is a DEI hire. Let me explain. Kamala Harris had narrowed this down to 3 men, and they all sort of share certain attributes. They were 3 white men. The last woman I remember being mentioned as a potential running mate to Kamala Harris was Gretchen Whitmer, but her name was removed many, many weeks ago. I think because, well, she's an odious individual and she and Kamala Harris both have very frightening laughs. You don't want both of them on the same ticket. But really, there was no woman ever considered for this because, well, Kamala Harris checks that box. So why would you want two women on the ticket? That's not diverse. And did you notice that not one person of color was ever really considered to be Kamala Harris's running mate? Why would you do that? Right? I mean, think of Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland. Nope, sorry, dude. Can't even consider you. You're black. Think about Cory Booker, Kamala Harris's colleague in the U.S. Senate. Sorry, Cory, great guy, but can't even think about you as my running mate. You're black. Blacks, Asians, Latinos need not apply for this job. Can't do it. We got to get a white man, you see, because diversity. This pick was a DEI hire. And there's two things you need to recognize about that. Tim Walz, the DEI running mate, is there to show America that the Democrats are diverse. See, they've got one of each. One man, one woman. One white, one person of color. Take your pick, either Asian or African American. Oh, excuse me, black, not African American. Either way, we got you covered. We're diverse. But also, and this is key, frankly, Kamala Harris couldn't possibly ever pick another woman or another person of color as her running mate because Americans are racist and Americans are sexist, and they would never go for it. I mean, we don't think they're really going to go for Kamala Harris at all, but maybe they will. I mean, we had that Obama thing happen a little while ago. So we think we might be able to get her across the finish line. But you see, there's no possible way they'd ever go for two people of color on the ticket or two women because they're sexist too. See, we're Democrats, and that's what we think of our fellow Americans. That's what we think of this country. We constantly look at this country from the perspective of a proctologist. We think the worst of Americans. And we know for a fact how racist and sexist and bigoted Americans are, especially those rednecks we have to appeal to in Western Pennsylvania, in Michigan, and in Wisconsin. And don't even get us started on Georgia and North Carolina. So we better give them a white man so they feel safe with this ticket. That's what Democrats think of you. That's what Democrats think of this country. And that's why Tim Walz is the DEI hire of a lifetime. He had to diversify this ticket with his whiteness because that's how leftists think. Now, just between you and me, and thankfully, I'm sure no one from the Harris campaign are watching, but they royally screwed up here. I would be in a very different mood today if Josh Shapiro had been chosen. Don't get me wrong, Josh Shapiro was also a leftist and also a radical, but Josh Shapiro actually delivers on quite a few things that Kamala Harris needs for her ticket. First of all, he can deliver the state of Pennsylvania because he's very, very popular there. He's held statewide office as the attorney general for a couple of terms, and now he's the newly elected governor, and he won by a pretty wide margin. It wasn't even close. Josh Shapiro could have taken Pennsylvania off the map. Also, Josh Shapiro, as left-wing and liberal and radical as he is, I hate to say it, he actually has a couple of good ideas. He's actually been reasonable on a couple of things. And, I mean, he would have been able to play that up and say, oh, sure, Kamala's really woke, but not me. I'm sort of old school Democrat, right? So vote for me. She didn't pick Josh Shapiro. And by the way, as a Republican, I'm glad. I really am. Because that would have been a really strong choice. It would have been a really strong ticket. But she didn't pick Josh Shapiro. And the reason she didn't pick Josh Shapiro actually makes me incredibly sad. Actually angry too. Almost melancholy and grief-stricken. She didn't pick Josh Shapiro because the power base of the Democrat Party would never hear of it. You see, Josh Shapiro is Jewish. And like many American Jews, he has voiced support for the state of Israel. In fact, when he was younger, he wrote articles about them, articles that he apologized for recently just to sort of clear the way, just in case he did get the pick, but he didn't. He even volunteered for the IDF in his youth, as many young Jewish Americans do at various times in their college years. And that just wouldn't fly. Yeah. There are certain neighborhoods in Michigan, it's known sometimes as Michiganistan, that would absolutely never accept a Jew on the Democrats' ticket. They would stay home. They would not vote. And so, yeah, you may win Pennsylvania, but you lose Michigan. So what are you going to do? Sorry, Josh. Jews need not apply. We're Democrats. We're inclusive. As you saw on Wall Street yesterday, these are trying times for our economy. They're crazy, in fact. And one thing that you might be looking for with your investments and your retirement is some security. But where do you find it? You want security everywhere. You want security for our country, for our leaders, for our families. But if you're not financially secure, if all your eggs are in one basket, like cash and stocks, gold and silver are an excellent way to diversify those savings. They're a hedge against inflation. They're a physical asset that's in high demand globally from the wealthy to central banks. And through my friends at Birch Gold Group, you can join those wealthy and central banks. You can own physical gold and silver in a tax-sheltered retirement account. Yeah, you can diversify an IRA, an old IRA or 401k for no money out of your pocket. You can diversify it into an IRA in gold and silver. It's one thing you can do to secure your family savings. So get more information by texting my name, Larry, to 989898 and receive a free, no-obligation info kit. Learn the role precious metals play in your overall savings strategy. Again, text Larry, L-A-R-R-Y, to 989898. They've got an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau, thousands of happy customers. You can trust Birch Gold like I do. Text Larry to 989898 today. Now, you may be absolutely shocked at this choice of Tim Walz, and you may be thinking, okay, this is good news for Trump. This actually makes the Trump-Vance ticket look a little better in certain regions. Maybe today is a bright spot for the direction of the election. Maybe Trump is going to win the Electoral College election in November, and he'll be inaugurated next January. You may be thinking that. But Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, well, he's not having any of it. In a video of an appearance he gave at a bookstore in Washington, D.C., and I'll give you details on that bookstore in a moment, Jamie Raskin revealed exactly what he and other mainstream Democrats in Washington, D.C. are planning post-election day should Donald Trump prevail.
Again, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient because what can be put into the Constitution can slip away from you very quickly. And the greatest example going on right now before our very eyes is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which they're just disappearing with a magic wand, as if it doesn't exist, even though it could not be clearer what it's stating. And so, they want to kick it to Congress. So it's going to be up to us on January 6, 2025, to tell the rampaging Trump mobs that he's disqualified. And then we need bodyguards for everybody in civil war conditions, all because the 9 justices, not all of them, but these justices who have not many cases to look at every year, not that much work to do, a huge staff, great protection, simply do not want to do their job and interpret what the great 14th Amendment means. And I'm glad that Sherilyn's creating her new center so we can bring that again.
Okay, so we're going to break this down bit by bit, but I just want you to know overall what you just heard from a sitting congressman is quite possibly the most radical, violence-inducing, mob-inciting, insurrectionist, unconstitutional, un-American election tampering language that I've heard ever in my life. And these are the people who lecture you about grandma walking through a door at the Capitol held open by a police officer on January 6th. Jamie Raskin, one of the architects of the January 6th committee, who thinks you're the radical, just says that well, we'll break down exactly what he said here. First, quickly about the setting. First of all, Jamie Raskin is a congressman from Maryland. He lives in Tacoma Park, Maryland, which is literally right across the street from the Washington, D.C. border. So he may tell you he's from Maryland. I think, in fact, he was born in Washington, D.C., but he realized that being a D.C. resident, he'd never get power. And he's a radical left-wing socialist, and he wants power. So he moves to Maryland. He became a state senator in Maryland, then ran for Congress, and he thought about running for Senate this last time around, too, but decided he liked his power in the House of Representatives. He, of course, also was one of the House managers for the impeachments of Donald Trump. And yes, you've seen him now as the ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. He is very powerful. He also hates you. He hates Trump, he hates Republicans, and he hates people who vote and support Trump and Republicans. He thinks you're a fascist. This setting is a bookstore called Politics and Prose. It's on Connecticut Avenue in Northwest D.C. It's a bookstore where people go wearing their Birkenstocks and their bandanas, and they have just had their gummies or maybe just smoked pot, and they sit around and they talk about Marxism while reading books and drinking lattes. It's Politics and Prose. And this was some sort of book event, as you can see. Now, I want to break down exactly what Jamie Raskin just threatened. And make no mistake, this is a threat. And the kind of assassination porn language that he is floating out there so nonchalantly and casually with that, what looks like the skin of a dead squirrel on his head, is so absolutely outrageous that he literally, seriously, quite sincerely, should be censored by the House of Representatives for this. This is beyond volatile, what he's suggesting.
And it's necessary, but it's not sufficient, because what can be put into the Constitution can slip away from you very quickly. And the greatest example going on right now before our very eyes is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which they're just disappearing with.
All right, so Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, of course, was passed after the Civil War. And Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says that any person who held elected office or was an officer of the United States federal government before the Civil War, and then or helped mount an insurrection or rebellion against the U.S. government cannot then hold office as a representative or officer of the federal government after leading an insurrection or rebellion. That's what he's talking about. Now, there's a couple of problems with this. First of all, and least of which, the President of the United States is not an officer of the federal government. So there's no possible way that the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment would apply to the President of the United States who wins an election, number one. But number two, there was no insurrection or rebellion on January 6th. I know you hear insurrection all the time from Jake Tapper and George Stephanopoulos and other idiots in the media. But do you know how I know for a fact that there was no insurrection on January 6th? Do you? Do you know how you can know for a fact that there was no insurrection on January 6th? I'm going to tell you. Because there have been over 1,000 people arrested from the events of January 6th. And charges were even brought by Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, against Donald Trump for his actions on January 6th. And of all of those charges, the 1,000 people who were charged by the Justice Department with unlimited budgets to charge those people with whatever crime they found, and with the charges that Jack Smith laid against Donald Trump for his actions on January 6th, not one of them have been charged with insurrection. Not one. Not one. Insurrection against the United States, insurrection against the federal government is in fact a crime. If anybody broke that law on January 6th, do you think anyone from the Biden-Garland Justice Department would hesitate to bring those charges against them? Not one person, including Donald J. Trump, has been charged with insurrection. But Mr. Raskin, he thinks that he can trigger what he calls civil war conditions by exercising the third clause of the 14th Amendment, which deals specifically with people who lead an insurrection or rebellion against the United States. But we got to break this down even further about how outrageous and despicable what Jamie Raskin is doing here.
The magic wand, as if it doesn't exist, even though it could not be clearer what it's stating. And so, they want to kick it to Congress. So it's going to be up to us on January 6, 2025, to tell the rampaging Trump mobs that he's disqualified. And then
So it's going to be up to us to tell the rampaging Trump mobs that he's disqualified. I just want you to think this through, because the idiot Marxists at Politics and a Prose can't quite figure this out. But if, in fact, Jamie Raskin and his partners in crime in the House of Representatives and the Senate want to exercise the Clause 3 of the 14th Amendment to say that Donald Trump is disqualified from the presidency and he wants to hold back the rampaging Trump mobs in 2025 January to make sure that that happens, the only way that scenario exists is if Donald Trump wins the election in November. Right? I mean, there's no reason to invoke the 14th Amendment on January 6, 2025 if Donald Trump loses the election. So Jeremy Raskin here is flippantly and chuckling away as he muses about what he intends to do the first week of January 2025 under the scenario that Donald Trump has legitimately won the election, that the people of the United States of America have elected him as their duly elected 47th president of the United States. This is this fantasy that Jeremy Raskin is imagining for himself, standing astride the doors of the House of Representatives, keeping back the rampaging mobs, the hordes of Trump supporters, as he negates an election, as he reverses single-handedly the presidential election of 2024. Do you realize how warped and sick this man is? Every single thing they always say about you and about Trump is actually true of them. You know this by now. The fact that his brain can even imagine, let alone fantasize, as he is right now, about this moment happening, tells you what a totalitarian he is and what his views of the Constitution and the American people are. Because the only way he plays this out is if you overwhelmingly vote for Donald Trump and Donald Trump wins the election. But he's saying, nah, it's not good enough. Sorry, we're going to have to keep you down. And don't you love the language he uses about the American citizens who vote for Trump? Rampaging hordes of Trump supporters. But a little bit more here.
then we need bodyguards for everybody in civil war conditions, all because the 9 justices, not all of them.
Civil war conditions. Listen to what this man is saying. Do I need to remind anybody that it is less than 4 weeks from an assassination attempt of Donald Trump? And he is flippantly, casually, half jokingly using this kind of language, that if Trump wins, we will face civil war conditions in this country? Is there anything more irresponsible, reckless than this kind of absolute absurdity? But you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene's the problem. Matt Gaetz is the problem. These people are demonic. One other thing, he now pivots and says, but it's all the Supreme Court's fault, right?
But these justices who have not many cases to look at every year, not that much work to do, a huge staff, great protection, simply do not want to do their job and interpret what the great 14th Amendment means. And I'm glad that Sherilyn's creating her new center.
Yeah. So not only does he basically call for civil war conditions because Trump is going to win the election, and then say that he's going to single-handedly, along with his pals in Congress, invoke the 14th Amendment and negate the presidential election and say that Trump is not qualified. But he blames it all on the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court where the justices have now had to hire their own personal private security to keep themselves safe and keep their homes safe, where one of the justices actually was under threat of a legitimate kidnapping and assassination attempt, where thank God the man has been arrested and thrown in jail. But Justice Kavanaugh actually had to face the potential of he and his family being kidnapped and assassinated. And this guy is flippantly saying, yeah, the Supreme Court, they don't do their jobs and they're fine with violence in this country. He's calling for violence in this country. This is Jamie Raskin. And he's a sweetheart. He's a darling of the Democrats. I wouldn't be surprised Kamala Harris makes him her attorney general if she wins. Here's Jamie Raskin.
Never before in American history had a president called for a crowd to come contest the counting of electoral votes by Congress, or engaged in any effort designed to influence, delay, or obstruct the joint session of Congress in doing its work required by our Constitution and the Electoral Count Act. I have an objection because 10 of the 29 electoral votes cast by Florida were cast by electors not lawfully certified because they violated Florida's prohibition against dual office holding.
Debate is out of order.
Yeah, that's Jamie Raskin, January 6th of 2017, trying to stand in the way of Donald Trump becoming president that day. Now, he wasn't invoking Clause 3 of the 14th Amendment. Instead, he was pulling something else out of his squirrely little butt. But Jamie Raskin tried to keep Trump from being president then. And now he swears to do the same thing again. One more little scene from this event at Politics and Prose in D.C.
Last night, I was most worried about the Supreme Court's prospective imminent abdication of its very clear duty to disqualify Donald Trump from the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and what that might mean if their decision says that it's really up to Congress on January 5th or January 6th, 2025, to disqualify him at the counting of the Electoral College votes, which really could lead to something akin to civil war, if that's what the suggestion is, which is what I think I heard when I went to the oral argument, that they themselves were unwilling to rule whether or not the Colorado Supreme Court was correct in finding that he had engaged in insurrection on January 6, 2021. So, but that was just last night's worry. So
once again, using all of this violent language, this violent imagery of civil war and Trump mobs and violence and everything that he's fantasizing about on January 6, 2025, as he stands in the way of the duly elected president actually being certified by the Electoral College vote. Something I've been told recently was pretty un-American, unpatriotic, and insurrection-y. Now, let me just take a quick moment here to do something that the Right Honorable Congressman Jamie Raskin apparently can't find it in himself to do. And that's be reasonable and speak calm at a time where things are a little tense in this country. I will remind you that it was less than 4 weeks ago that an assassin's bullet came a quarter inch away from shattering Donald Trump's skull. The language that the left has employed about Donald Trump for the last 10 years, let alone the last 10 weeks, has created a climate of fear and loathing and division and, yes, violence in this country. Jamie Raskin and his party and his leadership will tell you that Donald Trump is an existential threat to the future of this country, that if he is elected, We will never have another election in this country, that he will act as an authoritarian and a dictator. And that's why we must thwart our Constitution, thwart our democratic norms, and do whatever it takes, no matter how unconstitutional and undemocratic it is, to keep him from being president. And when he envisions the possibility of Donald Trump winning in November, he now invokes images like civil war conditions and violent hordes of Trump mobs being violently held back because he is unconstitutionally invoking the 14th Amendment to say that Donald Trump is disqualified. Well, let me be the grown-up in the room. You would think a sitting congressman would take on that role, but no, it's up to me. Your good old pal Larry at Town Hall Media doing this fabulous stream for you right now. I'll be the mature grown-up in the room. What Jamie Raskin just said, what you heard Jamie Raskin envision, is never, ever going to happen. And Jamie Raskin should say that. He should be honest with you. But he doesn't want to be honest with you. He doesn't want to cool things down. He doesn't want you to not be scared. He doesn't want you to feel like we have a sound system in this country. He doesn't want you to think that the Constitution will prevail. He wants you on edge. He wants you angry. He wants you violent. He's begging for it. But you're better than that. We're reasonable. You see, there's something else in the 14th Amendment that Jamie Raskin isn't sharing with you. To invoke the 14th Amendment, to disqualify Donald Trump after he wins the election in November, Jamie Raskin needs 2/3 of the House of Representatives, and he needs 2/3 of the United States Senate. This is never, ever, ever in Jamie Raskin's wildest dreams ever going to happen. And you deserve to know that. You deserve to take a breath. And you deserve to look at Jamie Raskin with absolute disdain. He is a tiny, angry little man. And he will never amount to anything more than being the congressman from his little angry socialist district in Maryland, where, yes, he wields power, but that's as far as it goes. And yes, that is, in fact, a dead squirrel on his head. Now, I told you that it is remarkable to me that the mainstream media, the corporate legacy media, has completely ignored the fact that less than 4 weeks ago, there was an assassination attempt on the life of Donald Trump. It is absolute outside the realm of possibility that people who are paid to cover American politics and leadership in Washington, D.C., have completely abdicated any level of responsibility on pursuing what should be the biggest story of the year. And that is the security breakdown of the Secret Service that allowed this assassination attempt to take place. Does anyone out there on a daily basis contemplate how close we came to Donald Trump being assassinated before our very eyes? How incredibly close this was, and how in the hell does this happen? I still think about it. I am unnerved by it. And we're supposed to just walk away saying, oh, look, the Olympics are going on. Simone Biles, she's the GOAT. I'm sorry. I'm not ready to go there with you. Yes, I know it's a big deal that Joe Biden stepped aside. Yes, it's a big deal that he was forced to side with a silent coup. Yes, it's a big deal that they hand-selected Kamala Harris. Yeah, of course, it's a big deal that Tim Walz is a radical socialist and he's the running mate now. All these things are big deals. None of it is bigger than the fact that the Secret Service had an absolute total failure of systems and procedures that allowed an assassin's bullet to come that close to murdering Donald Trump. and upending our entire constitutional process. Well, we're still fixated on this story, and thankfully, our buddy Jesse Waters over at Fox News is also fixated. Also, thankfully, there's a good chunk of senators who are also fixated on it. One of them, Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri. I want you to watch this segment with me because there are new revelations with regard to the breakdown that day of the Secret Service, new revelations as to how this abomination happened. And you need to know about it.
Woodwork. Furious about last week's press conference where the director, Ron Rowe, admitted the agency failed but wouldn't fire anyone. Trump's entire protective detail's been an illusion. The rally in Butler was the first time the Secret Service sent counter snipers to a Trump event. And those snipers were communicating by text message without Wi-Fi. Only the locals had radios, and according to the Washington Post, the Secret Service wasn't even in the same room as they were. They were in a completely different command center on the opposite side of the farm. Basically, the Secret Service was playing a big game of telephone while Crooks was stalking the grounds. Who signed off on this disastrous plan? According to whistleblowers who've spoken to Senator Josh Hawley, it all comes down to the lead site agent, who they claim is inexperienced and incompetent.
All right. Now, we'll get to the Hawley part of this segment in just a second, but in case you missed all that, because it was a great breakdown from Jesse, they have great producers there who encapsulate these things. This was the first time the counter snipers had ever been used at a Trump rally this year. That's curious, isn't it? The first time they have counter snipers happens to be the first time they need to use a counter sniper to take out and kill the suspected assassin. That's, I mean, great timing, right? And how were they to communicate with these counter snipers that were positioned up on the roof above Donald Trump's head? Text message. Text message. You're not supposed to drive a car while you send and receive texts. But apparently, if you're a counter sniper for the Secret Service, while you're supposed to be watching rooftops and preparing to take out a potential threat to the President of the United States, it's okay to be playing Wordle and checking your phone for text messages. What did the local law enforcement do? Send a little emoji of a gun and a head? And are you serious? Oh, and the text messages didn't have Wi-Fi support, so they were relying on the cell towers that everyone at the rally was also using to take their own social media videos of the rally. So they weren't even getting timely updates on their text messages because of the strain on the cell network. This is Keystone Cop stuff. And we were told on day one that, well, yeah, we rely on local law enforcement to be our eyes and ears on the ground, but if they see anything, they radio to the command center. They're not on the same frequency of the Secret Service, but they go to the command center and there's someone at the command center who coordinates the communication. Remember that story? Now we learn, as Jesse Waters just laid out, that they were communicating, but the command center wasn't in one place. They had their local regional law enforcement command center, and then in a completely different room, they had the Secret Service command center. What the hell is the point? If you can't communicate a threat to the Secret Service, then who are you talking to? Clearly no one. They were literally talking to no one. And it all just happened to occur on the day that there happened to be an assassin there with a rifle shooting bullets at Donald Trump.
Senator Josh Hawley's been speaking with these whistleblowers, and he joins us now. Senator, what have these whistleblowers been telling your office?
Well, what they've been saying, Jesse, is that this individual, the site agent, the lead agent, was known to the Trump campaign to be inexperienced, to be ineffectual, to be, frankly, incompetent at their job. Well, I'm also told by whistleblowers that on that day, she was not enforcing the normal security protocols. She was not checking people's IDs. She did not use Secret Service agents. Most of the agents there that day were not Secret Service agents. They were Homeland Security agents. And get this, Jesse, most of them had never worked a rally before. And yet this is who she chose to staff the event with, and she didn't train them or integrate them. From top to bottom, it was a total disaster. Jesse, it is a miracle, not only that Trump is alive, but that more good Americans were not killed. It's unbelievable.
You're saying that the site agent in charge of this security in Butler wasn't checking IDs? What do you mean? She was just letting people in?
That is what whistleblowers tell me, is that IDs were not checked to allow individuals into secure areas, Jesse. In other words, it was a total free-for-all. Whistleblowers portray to me a circumstance, a situation that was totally out of control, where people were milling around, including in what were supposed to be highly secure areas. Nobody knew who they were. By the way, it was also the lead site agent's job to make sure that the line of sight for where Trump was clear, that agents could see all angles. And she didn't do that. In fact, I'm told that the line of sight was obstructed, which means that agents from different angles couldn't really see around Trump, couldn't see potential dangers to Trump. This is pretty textbook stuff, Jesse. And what whistleblowers say to me is none of it was done properly. None of it was done by the book. And frankly, when you know all that, it's amazing more people weren't killed. This person needs to be fired, as does anybody who had leadership on that day.
Hey, Larry, you're muted.
Thank you. That's a great encapsulation from Senator Hawley about what the whistleblowers have told him. And again, just to summarize, no IDs checked in secure areas, people able to mill in and out where only law enforcement and Secret Service personnel were supposed to be there. And, about that law enforcement and Secret Service personnel, they had Homeland Security people there who have never worked a rally before. But then that goes back to the fact that the Trump campaign has continuously asked for more Secret Service personnel who are experts in this kind of thing, and they continued to be denied by the Secret Service. This one lead agent who was in charge of setting all of this up and coordinating it also neglected to clear the line of sight from the rooftops where a sniper might be able to get. And also, of course, presumably, they were the ones who determined that this rooftop where the sniper did, in fact, come this close from assassinating Donald Trump, that rooftop did not have to be in the secure perimeter. Now, that's all devastating and outrageous and maddening. Add to the fact, as Josh Hawley just said, this person should be fired. 100% this person should be fired. Not only have they not fired this person, they won't even tell you this person's name. They're trying to circle the wagons and protect themselves. But it gets even worse than that. It gets even worse than that. And for those of us who actually had so much respect for the institution of the Secret Service, those of us who thought that, yes, Washington, D.C. is broken, and yes, it's a swamp, and yes, these giant bureaucratic agencies get bloated and they go into self-protection mode and they've lost sight of what they're supposed to do. But at least we've got a couple of institutions that are still pristine, that still deserve the respect of the American people. And one of them is the Secret Service. If you're like that, and you're seeing this report, your heart is about to get broken even more. Watch this.
This person is still doing security. They're still in charge of security for political events. Why aren't they sidelined and under investigation themselves?
This is exactly what the whistleblowers who are coming to me, Jesse, want to know. And in fact, we know that this individual is still doing all those things because the director confirmed it. He told me under oath that, yeah, this individual is still working events. In fact, he said still doing investigations, which raises the question, is she investigating herself?
Right.
I mean, this is insane. And I'll just say this, Jesse.
Sure.
Whistleblowers are coming forward from the Secret Service because they can't believe what leadership is doing. They cannot believe that the Secret Service is not taking action to clear out the rot, frankly. They're scared to death this is going to happen again. We can't let it happen again. We've got to get the facts.
Was this site agent for Butler, was she one of these Cheadle hires? You know how Cheadle has an agenda. She just promotes people without merit. Was that person a person like that?
I don't know the answer to that. All I am told by these whistleblowers is that this individual was inexperienced, that she was known to the campaign to be, frankly, not very good at her job. They had concerns about this individual before the Butler rally. Again, when she was assigned to Butler, the campaign was worried. They thought, uh-oh, this has not gone well before. And my gosh, it didn't go well that day.
All right. Well, I'm very glad these whistleblowers are speaking out to your office. Please keep the public posted on some of these developments, because the more and more we hear about it, just the angrier I get.
Yeah. You and me both, Jesse. Yeah. That person responsible for all of those missteps, all of those errors in judgment, all of those, well, who knows, maybe even neglectful choices that were made purposefully, that person is still in charge of security for events on behalf of the Secret Service. I wonder if she's doing Kamala Harris's events, right? Do you wonder how much do you want to bet that that inexperienced buffoon who was responsible for what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, how much do you want to bet she's not handling Kamala Harris's events or First Lady Joe Biden's events? I would say Joe Biden, but he doesn't do events anymore. The news from the Secret Service is even worse, actually. Susan Crabtree, an investigative reporter for Real Clear Politics, has been covering the Secret Service for many, many years now. And she's really running circles around everyone else in town on this story because of her sources. And the latest exclusive she has from her sources says that the former Secret Service chief, that would be Kimberly Cheadle, who resigned in disgrace, even though Alejandro Mayorkas and Joe Biden both expressed their support and full confidence in her abilities, even after the assassination attempt. Yeah, that chief, Cheadle, wanted to destroy the cocaine evidence from the White House in July of last year. This is according to 3 sources in the Secret Service. New details emerge about the unsolved cocaine mystery. There was a partial DNA hit on the baggie of cocaine found in exclusive space of the White House, and Secret Service leaders bungled efforts to make it all disappear. And there's now some question as to whether Cheadle and others in command of the Secret Service retaliated against top uniformed Secret Service agents over his refusal to go along with their push to dispose of the cocaine. Who in law enforcement does this? They find cocaine in the White House. It makes headlines all around the world. The Secret Service is responsible for the investigation. They spend a couple of weeks investigating. They come up with an unbelievable story that they have no idea who it is. And the investigation is over. It's inconclusive. I guess we'll never know who brought the cocaine into the White House. And then, at that moment, who, with any level of law enforcement experience or knowledge or wisdom or training, says, well, guys, investigation's over. Let's destroy all the evidence now. Who in the hell does that? Apparently, Susan Crabtree does that. Oh, excuse me. Susan Crabtree is the reporter. Long day. Apparently, Kimberly Cheadle does that. Kimberly Cheadle wanted to destroy the cocaine evidence so that no one else could pick up that investigation after she was gone. And when people in the uniform division of the Secret Service says, hell no. By the way, uniform division of the Secret Service, they're like cops, okay? They're not the ones in the black ties and the black suits and the sunglasses who are around the protectee and do all of the things and they're ready to take a bullet and everything. No, they're part of the Secret Service too. They're the ones who are in uniform. They're like the SWAT people. And they conducted this investigation as well. And they said, hell no, we're not going to do that because they actually have some level of professionalism and expertise. But Ms. Cheadle did. She wanted to destroy the cocaine evidence. Why, one must wonder? Well, I want to remind you of this video. The cocaine story happened on July 2nd in the White House. Now, when the cocaine was discovered in the White House, the first family was in Camp David in Maryland. That's the presidential retreat that's been used by presidents since Dwight Eisenhower. It's like a half an hour helicopter flight for the president and the first family. And Biden likes to go there a lot when he's not going to Delaware. It was July 4th. And they went to Camp David because for the fireworks on the 4th of July proper, they were back at the White House. They were on the balcony, right? And then the story emerged after July 4th that cocaine had been found. But no Biden was in the White House when the cocaine was found. Now, make no mistake, though, the Biden family had assembled at the White House so that they could all then go to Camp David together. Then they find the cocaine, and then the Bidens come back to the White House, stand on the balcony of the South Lawn, looking over the Ellipse and the Mall and the Washington Monument, and as a family, the all-American family that the Bidens are, they watched the fireworks. Do you remember how Hunter Biden was behaving that night while the fireworks were going off? Do you remember the mannerisms? Do you remember the pacing back and forth on the balcony? The rubbing of the head? Actually, now that you've seen and remembered Hunter Biden's behavior that night on the balcony, I now want you to turn your attention to his stepmother, Dr. Jill. Now, this is a moment when the family is assembled and they're watching the fireworks. It's a great all-American moment. Watch Jill. Watch her aware of Hunter Biden's behavior. Watch her grasping onto the rail of the balcony like she's on the Titanic after it hit the iceberg. She seems kind of tense, doesn't she? And isn't Hunter Biden acting like a guy who lost something? Isn't Hunter Biden also acting like a guy who's on something? Now, I'm not suggesting Hunter Biden would be the type to have or use cocaine, because there's nothing in his history that would suggest that. Oh, wait a minute. No, actually, there's quite a bit in Hunter Biden's history that would suggest that he would be the guy who has the cocaine and used the cocaine. And it sure seems tense on that balcony between the family, especially with Jill. It's almost like Hunter said, guys, we got a problem. Look at Jill's face. Now, I remind you of this, not just to gratuitously make fun of the Biden family and kick them while they're pretty down, but there's a larger issue here. I want to remind you about why Kimberly Cheadle was where she was the day that a bullet came this close from killing Donald Trump. Kimberly Cheadle, the former director of the Secret Service, had a career with the Secret Service for a couple of decades. When Donald Trump was elected president, she quit. Now, we're not sure why, but I think it's fair to assume that pretty much anybody who was working for the Secret Service and then quit when Donald Trump was elected, part of that rationale was they didn't want to work with the Trump family. And maybe it goes so far as they didn't want to take a bullet for that man. I don't know that, but I think it's fair to speculate that. And I shall, in fact, make that speculation. Because when Trump was no longer president and the Bidens were back in the White House, Kimberly Cheadle was fine coming back to the Secret Service, this time as the director. And it's been reported by the New York Post and other news agency that it was one person's specific request that Kimberly Cheadle become the new director of the Secret Service. That one person who said, I want Cheadle as the head of the Secret Service, that very tense woman right there. It was Jill Biden. You see, Kimberly Cheadle was on the second lady's Secret Service detail when Joe Biden was vice president. And when the new administration began, it was Jill Biden who said, let's get Kim Cheadle to be the director of the Secret Service. Why is that important? Why is it important that it was Jill Biden who made the decision to make Kimberly Cheadle the director of the Secret Service? Well, let me tell you something about the Secret Service. They're known for two incredibly noble, admirable, almost heroic traits. The one is the trait that everybody knows about, that they are sworn to protect a member of the president's chain of command to the noble level that they would literally give their life to save them. They are sworn to take a bullet for the president, the vice president, members of the president's family, and members of the cabinet who are in the succession for the presidency. That's incredible. These are men and women who are made of stuff that most people aren't. That's something everybody knows about the Secret Service, that they are sworn to give their life for their protectee, and that's amazing. The other thing that the Secret Service does is not talked about very much, but it plays into this story. It plays into the cocaine, it plays into the Biden family, and it plays into Jill Biden specifically wanted Kimberly Cheadle to be in charge of the Secret Service. What's the other thing the Secret Service does? Secret Service keeps secrets, family secrets. You see, the trade-off when you're in a first family or a second family, the trade-off for the incredible protection you're given and the peace of mind knowing that the president and the wife of the president and children and on are all protected by these incredible men and women. There's a downside to that protection. You have to let these Secret Service agents into your life, into very private, personal moments in your life. The Secret Service is always there. There is always an agent there to protect the president, to protect the first lady. They're in the car. They're in the private hotel rooms. They're in the residencies. They are always around. And because of that, the Secret Service hear things. The Secret Service sees things. The Secret Service knows things. The Secret Service knows everything, all of the little intimate details. The president and the first lady have a fight or an argument, Secret Service knows about it. If there's a scandal brewing and they have to talk about it, Secret Service knows about it. If their son is a coke addict and lost a packet of cocaine in the White House and they're talking about it, the Secret Service knows about it. The Secret Service knows a lot about the Bidens. And they know a lot about the Trumps, and they know a lot about the Obamas. They know a lot about the Bushes and the Clintons. In fact, one Secret Service agent was sort of ostracized after the Clinton presidency because he wrote a book about some of the things that happened between Bill and Hillary. You remember that? So Jill Biden specifically wants her friend, the person she knew that she could trust from when she was second lady, to be the new director of the Secret Service. And it was Kim Cheadle, and she leapfrogged over people who had more experience and were probably next in line to be director of the Secret Service, but Jill wanted Kimberly. And so she got the job. And then something so weird and so bizarre happens. The cocaine is found in the White House, and the family had just been there, and then they left to go to Camp David. Cocaine is found. The family comes back. Hunter Biden's acting like a maniac. But the investigation led by Kimberly Cheadle and the Secret Service comes up with nothing, maybe a partial DNA sample, but nothing else. And then Kimberly Cheadle, Jill Biden's hand-picked selection for the Secret Service, wants to destroy all evidence after the investigation comes up empty. These are all amazing coincidences, aren't they? From the lack of security at the Trump rally that led to the assassination attempt on the first time they ever had counter snipers, and the counter snipers were there to kill the guy who was the attempted assassin so that they could never hear or learn anything about him or have a conversation about him. And how did he get in? And there were no communications, and the command centrals were upset, and no one was talking to each other, all the way up to the cocaine and the destruction or attempt to destroy the evidence. These coincidences are just remarkable, aren't they? I mean, super, super dumbfoundingly remarkable. What are the odds? What indeed are the odds? That's it for today. We'll be back next time. Thank you for being part of our live stream, and thanks for watching After the Fact on video. We really appreciate your support and your patronage. We'll look for you next time. My name's Larry O'Connor. You can call me Larry.